Hey everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to today's CATHETA webinar. We're coming to you live on January 17th, 2024. For anybody whose first webinar this is with us, CATHETA means learning in Greek. And today we're going to be learning about how to assess your tribal housing needs from Marie Bonville. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also happy that you could be with us today. Please follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. So just a friendly reminder. Before we get started, I want you to know how to use some of the features that are available and how the environment here on Adobe Connect works. So if you look at the top of your screen, you'll see an icon of either a person with their hand raised, or you might just see a hand. With that icon, you can either raise your hand, signal that you agree, signal that you disagree, or signal that you're stepping away. Now your screen should look similar to this graphic here. To the bottom left, you'll see a box that says Files. Here you'll find a copy of today's presentation along with any handouts and appendix items that are included. Feel free to download a copy for yourself. Just click the item you want to download, then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save it onto your device. Once the item is downloaded, it should appear in your device's download section. Our next box over is labeled Web Links. This is where you'll find our survey about today's webinar, along with the link to join our email list and any other links that'll be seen throughout today's presentation. Finally, all the way over to the right, we have a chat box. This is how you'll communicate with the instructor as well as us, the NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to interact by using the chat box. You can just type your message and hit enter, or click the up arrow button icon to submit. We, of course, encourage class participation, so feel free to write any questions or comments that you might have. And if you're having some tech support issues, those could also be submitted there. Know that most tech support problems can be solved by just exiting and then re-entering the meeting room. But if there's anything else, definitely let us know. And let's all go ahead and try out the chat box together. Go ahead and put your name, where you're joining us from, as well as your tribal affiliation. And while you're doing that, it's with great pleasure that I introduce today's instructor, Marie Bonville. I'll go ahead and hand it off to you now, Marie.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you to the folks in the room for being here today. We've got a lot to cover and a short amount of time to get there, so I will do my best, but I do appreciate you being here today along with my guest speaker, Kim Longsoldier, Housing Program Manager for, Home Ownership Program Manager for the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition. So you'll be hearing from Kim in a little while, but to get started, I am excited to be here. A little bit about myself. I started with the Seminole Tribe of Florida in 2007 in their education department, working on a lot of the tribal professional development and program position placements for our tribal members. And then I moved into housing, and that's kind of where I stayed. It has become my home in that I provide training and technical assistance all over the country in Native communities on topics of homeownership and community development. So I actually moved to North Georgia not too long ago, and I'm very thankful to continue to do the work that I do and serve our communities. A little bit about today's training. We are talking about housing needs assessment and what that will mean for your communities, how to, start the conversation with stakeholders, gaining their support. We are in tribal communities. There are leadership changes that take place. So you're constantly bringing people into the fold, bringing them into the conversation regarding what your housing needs are and how we can adapt to the changes that we've seen. You might have actually had a needs assessment done not too long ago, and still there may be need for a new one, right? So it's how to create that the conversation for policy change, for housing development, and to do it in a way that involves the community. So getting their feedback as well is important. The objectives are simple. We're going to talk about, the Needs Assessment 101 in terms of data collection, best practices. We'll talk about the challenges of, collecting this data. Where are you going to get the money for it, right? Who's going to fund this next round? And then also highlighting some success stories, which I have had the pleasure to be a part of. So here's a little funny joke. Garfield says, "I hate change. I didn't used to, but I've changed." Which just goes to show you that change is hard, right? I think that's what that feeling is, that anxiety that sometimes folks get when you say you want to bring up a needs assessment in the room, right? So what is the point of the needs assessment? It is to see the way things currently are and then determine how they should or can or should be to meet your tribal housing goals, right? So what are those goals? What do they look like? To encourage the availability of affordable housing. From the looks of it, I've got several housing authorities in the room, maybe some tribal housing departments, human services from other departments within the tribe. So there's a lot of folks that are that hang their hat on the need for housing and how they support their community. We promote, develop, and manage a mix of residential densities, right? So it's not one size fits all. You're going to need multifamily housing. You're going to need single family housing. You're going to need elder or student housing. What does that look like? So also to the housing types all across the country, we have stick-built homes. We certainly have modular homes. We have manufactured homes. So what do you need? What is the need in the community? Encourage preservation of existing housing stock. Certainly, most of us would say that is a priority, and that's where primarily the most of our budget is allocated on maintaining the housing stock that we have, right? Seeking resources to accomplish the objectives above, that's the hard part, right? Figuring out a way to pay for it. We know about our NAHASDA dollars and how far they will go. And so there is a conversation to be had in regards to additional resources, bringing in new stakeholders, talking to private or NGO, our native CDFIs, for example, as a vehicle to helping create more community development in our communities. So the end game is simple. Certainly, inventory and analysis of projected housing needs, that's first and foremost with any housing needs assessment. Your goals, your policies, your objectives. Maybe you've implemented things or a predecessor has implemented certain policies or procedures and you want to see the effects of those and you need that data collected. Certainly, identification of sufficient land for housing, right? So as I said before, the types of housing that's necessary. Maybe you're needing support services, wraparound services for it could be domestic violence, it could be foster care. You name it. There's tons of ways in which housing can look on your reservations or in your communities. And then, of course, the economic segment of this, housing is economic development, right? The idea that as many tribes move into different economic areas that produce, for example, energy being one of them, the idea that you would be able to take that energy in job creation and turn that into additional workforce housing is really important. It's a conversation that we need to have. So what is a need? A need is a discrepancy or a gap between what is and what should be. A need is, so therefore your needs assessment defines those needs. I think it's just giving you definitions. And I will say this, for those of you working in tribal housing, which it seems like the majority of you are, you might think to yourself, I know what the community needs, right? Let's just take the bias that we have, the little bit of service-minded. You're coming from a good place, but you do sometimes feel like you're so close to the picture that you sometimes feel like you know what the needs are. And I would say that the great thing about a needs assessment is it takes the focus off of what you, the staff, think is necessary or needed, and it gives the community an opportunity to have a voice in this discussion. And so, and the same is true of leadership. I think leadership, we're seeing every single day what our communities need, and in doing so, I don't think sometimes we can speak for them. I think they also need to have a voice. So this is going to help with policy and program planners, those that are minded in that way, that always want to take a program and make it better, or see the funding opportunity available and want to make it better. This will kind of pump the brakes and say, well, first, yes, this is what this funding will do for us, right? Who doesn't want to pursue new funding options? but at what cost, right? What's the benefit? Does it take away from our mission in some way? Is it going to be a burden to our staff? We don't know yet. We need a needs assessment to find out. So it details the collective housing needs. It prioritizes what our needs will be, right? First, second, third in your community. It'll provide context. I can't tell you how many folks I come in contact with that are like, I'm a new executive director. I don't really know what they did in the past. I can't find the files. I don't have context. So a lot of times these reports that are published help with that, give you an idea of where they were headed with one policy, program, or partnership strategy that fell short. And this is the best, I think, description for me. I'm a visual learner, and so sometimes I need to see it. So the needs assessment is a felt need, right? What people say they need. It can also be an expressed need, something by way of a requirement, right? Sometimes community housing needs assessments are required of the funding sources that we have. Normative needs, right? So maybe an expert is saying you have a population growth of so much per year, therefore you're going to need so many housing units per year. So it could be the nominal amount that the expert is telling you this is what is going to be needed of you and your department. And then also comparative need, right? So let's say you have a group that had homeownership education training and you had a group that didn't. And the difference between the two, you're comparing that and those needs based on those experiences. So there's tons of ways in which we can feel a need, but we need to understand the key terms, right? So as I said before, the need is a gap or discrepancy between present, what is, and what could or should be. And then also a target group. Sometimes we're going to have a single focus. It could be tribal veterans, for example. It could be that you want to serve your elders, and so you're going to need support from elder services within your department, within your tribe. The uses of the needs assessment, there's so many to count, too many to count, right? So it could be the basis for economic development efforts. Certainly, you can be in the room when they have those discussions to say, how will this affect workforce development? The new or amended policies that may come from the types of housing that you may need, compliance with federal and state requirements, as I mentioned before, certainly defining your budget and those priorities from a monetary standpoint. It gives you definition, and so therefore it can redefine your housing circumstances. What comes to mind is, with economic development, a lot of times with housing specifically, they'll say, well, we are here to serve the low and very low income community, and so we don't have enough essential worker housing. And so this is where you can say, well, then what funding sources or what strategies would I need to look out for to provide that sort of support? And then evaluating the end user service, right? So we don't always think about it, but is there some gap in the services that we're providing? Is there a way in which so we can support our membership better? And the needs assessment will help you highlight that. So of course, the benefits is that typically there's some funding out there for needs assessments, and I'll give you a few here later in the webinar. But also financing resources for housing efforts, you really need this data. It creates housing advocacy, right? Community awareness, the idea that you're coming together with your Native CDFIs or with your wraparound support services community to collect this data, that everyone can benefit from the data. Supporting housing, the collection itself, and collaboration that you'll have within both your departments, so within the tribe, and then also with external partners. And then strategic planning. I can't tell you how many times through strategic planning we find out we need a needs assessment first. Like, we can't actually do the work of strategic planning or build coalitions without the data that is necessary to support what we feel as service providers the community needs. So one thing about collecting the data itself is just knowing that we have come a long way, but there's still a ways to go in terms of collecting Native information for our communities in relation to health, services, and the equity itself. for collecting our own data, right? That data sovereignty is foremost what we collect. Exercising that as an acknowledged respect from those outside actors who would use that data is important. So I just wanted to note that, because there are folks that are out there saying, I know we need to collect this data, but who are we sharing it with and why? And that conversation will come up in your committee meetings when you talk about the needs assessment as to who would have access to this data and how best to provide it. Some tribes don't feel like they want to share that information, and certainly as sovereign nations, they should have that authority. So how do we view data sharing by tribal governments, with other entities, not both non-governmental and private? This is a growing conversation, especially after COVID-19 and all of the infusion of funding available for these sorts of projects. We all know that without the data, we are also underserved as a result. In monetary terms, we're not given the funding necessary. So the need has always been there, but collecting the data does come with its rightful conversations. So this particular article, for example, which I've provided you the link, talks about the perspectives of tribal data sharing and some of the best practices therein. So I just wanted to put that out there as an important comment that I recognize, and I think most of you would agree that you're going to have a conversation as to what can be shared, what should be shared, and how best to protect that data is a part of this conversation, especially in the initiating process, right? So when you first start out, those are the kind of conversations you're going to have. Of course, then you're going to create a community housing profile. What is that? How does it work? What does it look like? We'll talk about it. We're also going to go into assessing the need and some of the best practices there. Your community development goals and objectives. Who would be a part of that? How would it look? Really, it's not one size fits all. Throughout the United States, we're finding that tribes are doing what's best for them based on the types of partnerships that they're creating along the way. Housing coalitions have become essential in that discussion, and so it's great to have them as a single voice for your state or for your region. Implementing monitoring and evaluating. That's a mouthful, but it's really important. That's why it's all together there. So we will talk about those things in terms of stages. So components of a housing needs assessment, the community profile. Who lives in your community? What's their household look like? We'll talk about those characteristics in a minute. What demographic trends are out there, right? Who works here? Let's talk about workforce. What are their incomes? What kind of housing do they need? In terms of housing inventory, what types of housing are currently available, right? How much does it cost? So from an asset perspective, what are we working with? What do we already have that we're working with? What is the current maintenance cost associated with these facilities? And then, of course, the gap, right? How much new housing is necessary? It's going to take looking at this a little deeper, right? So the initiating process involves holding meetings, public briefings, and allocating various resources, and creating a positive place for people to talk about, conducting this needs assessment. So you have to start with the people. It should be comprised of people in different positions facilitating change, right, within your community. So, of course, leadership is invited to that conversation, stakeholders within your community, other departments, as I mentioned before, diverse backgrounds, variety of skills. If someone says they're not a people person, but they're great at one-on-one communication and building relationships on that level, then that doesn't mean they're not to be included in this process. But you do want a group that's going to stay positive. Can they have a positive influence on the discussion? I think, again, change is hard. So you get a lot of negativity at first. I'd be lying if I said that I haven't experienced that as well. But I do think that rather than focusing in on what we think the needs are, it's going to be very empowering to see what the community what direction they would prefer us to go in terms of allocating resources and whatnot. So membership evaluation, who will want to be involved and why? You can start there if your leadership or executive director, and you're sitting down saying, where do I start? How can they contribute? And then, who can have positive influence on the process? And I didn't get to ask this question, so you can definitely put it in the chat area. How many of you have current needs assessments? When was the last time you had a needs assessment? What would be your organization's relationship with the needs assessment? If you haven't had one in a while, you can put that in the chat as well. Just be interesting to see where everybody lands. The stakeholder list could look something like tribal leadership, of course, your housing departments, your departmental staff within your tribe, NGOs, so that's your native CDFIs or your housing partnership. It could be, groups that provide support services. Professional consultants, of course, they're a part of this process. I am great at the community outreach element. I am not a research and design person necessarily. I have created survey questions in the past, but to those professionals that know how to remove bias and multiple choice versus open-ended questions. And there's so much in the research and design of these questions, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But for the most part, it's a lot easier to collect quantitative data than qualitative data. So, asking a straightforward numbers question versus something that is a little more nuanced. I prefer a focus group, right? That's where I land. But there are folks that are much better and qualified to do some of this other work, but important to the process. And then, of course, groups directly affected. So tribal veteran service officers come to mind. Very helpful in collecting the needs assessments of veterans, right? They're speaking to each other from a place of fellowship as support for each other. And so it's a safe environment when they hand the needs assessment over to them and say, can you fill this out? So the next step is developing a community housing profile. What do I mean by that? Well, you want to assemble the demographic and housing data. You want housing demand, changes in inventory, essential role. Some of this stuff can come from your IHP for sure. Federal, state, and local data can provide you a broad basis of your profile. You can use the CAST system for population, age, tribal affiliation, income, household type, household size, cost burden, groups with special housing needs, as I said before, your elders, essential workers, fire, rescue, police, etc. Population and demographic projections, right? So if you have a tribal college and you see projected growth in enrollment, what will that mean for their housing needs, etc.? So thinking about that means paying attention to the data that you're collecting. And so again, those practices, not classifying Native communities properly, has created a gap in the amount of information we can collect from these larger data sets. So I will say that there's multiple descriptions of Native people found in data sources, both between the federal, state, and local entities. And then there's just a lot of different ways in which they've been collecting this data that may not be culturally responsive or appropriate. So collection, analysis, presentation of the data is sometimes inconsistent as well. I think that to do this right, we have to look at some of the people who have been really working in this field for a very long time and seeing the change. So I will show you and highlight some of those projects here in a little bit. Let's see here. Let me go to the chat and make sure I'm looking at the very last comment. So if anyone has had any sort of needs assessments in the past, please put it in the chat. If not, no worries. I just wanted to make sure I can tell you now that if you haven't been to this site, I tend to get my information when I'm doing some research and design work for home ownership development and training. I typically go to the Office of Policy and Research because that's where I can get some data on, like, for example, population growth, education levels. But as I said, it does have its pitfalls. And so that CAS I was talking about earlier, the American Communities Survey, ACS, it's the age, total household, household sizes, household types, income, race and ethnicity, language spoken, housing tenure. Of course, if you go to Office of Financial Management, you can also find county projections if you're in let's say, an urban area, as opposed to those tribes that are more rural. And then, of course, HUD has its AMI income limit areas. So there's a lot as far as boundaries go. I just wanted to give you some ideas for how far your community profile can go, the reach that it might be able to extend. And then, of course, your education or Office of Education Program Services, they have data that they might be able to share with you. Same with IHS and health. Local housing authority service providers, of course, that's you, but those other stakeholders that you work with for referral partners, et cetera, that's where you can collect some of this data. So the types of data, we talked a little bit about quantitative and qualitative, but what do I mean by that? So quantitative analysis is the numbers game, right? It's your community profile consists of a lot of things: population characteristics, and gosh, it goes down: count of population, population by age, population by diversity, population by forecasts, and then it's household characteristics: your household count, household sizes, and by that I mean number of bedrooms and baths, household types, housing tenure, overcrowding, and overcrowding estimates. So this is where it gets a little bit going back to areas that have been miscounted in the past. The definition of homelessness in Native communities looks very different. And I'll actually have a slide with some percentages that will show you that in many households, where folks are not counted as homeless because they are living with family or friends. And that is distinct to our communities, how we serve our families and our relatives. So overcrowding estimates are definitely one of those areas that I'm sure you all will want to have conversation with your collaborators on to make sure that it's counted properly. And of course, those categories that you find through HUD, the extremely low, moderate, middle income amounts. Those special needs groups I told you about before, in terms of housing, you've got groups that will be needing multifamily or single family or support services, housing, wraparound services. Workforce profile, local workforce characteristics, job to housing ratio, and then employment trends and projections. So things that are being brought, like for example, the what's the name? The Inflation Reduction Act, right, is going to hopefully bring jobs to our communities. And in doing so, what does that look like? How can we use some of that data to project what relationships the tribes will have to that funding opportunities that exist? We don't know yet, right? This is why having a needs assessment should be able to assist you in making informed decisions. Housing market conditions. If you're in urban areas, sometimes in having the conversation, we forget about our urban Indian markets, and they are facing what you would see in urban areas, like sales prices, rental rates, market rate, vacancy rate, housing development trends as far as mixed use that you would see in an urban area. They are competing with affordability issues, especially since the pandemic. The rise in costs associated with first-time homebuyers. I think the average price point is $350,000. And so it's really important that we're having that conversation as far as urban Indian markets as well. Special housing inventory, right? So as I said before, kind of goes along the lines of those special housing needs folks. The gap, right? Quantity of housing units available versus the household size, units needed for special demographic groups, our students, our elders. With our elders, there's a conversation, if you haven't been keeping up with the idea of aging in place and what that could look like for your community. It's been something in discussion, and I think we're going to see more of it. So maybe that's a discussion, that's a data point that you might want to collect in terms of working with your, maybe not 55, let's say 45 and older. You might want to have that question on there in terms of aging in place versus going to an elder facility. Land capacity analysis, of course, you're working with land use to determine the available available land to meet the housing needs that are available to you and what those costs would look like. The numbers game versus the story. This one's tough because in Native communities, you want a story to be told than just the pure numbers. And then it's also a personality thing. There's some people who are just the facts type person. They just want the numbers. And some people really do want to hear the stories behind this information. So qualitative data is different. Qualitative, these are going to be focus groups, going to be interviews that you have with the folks that you're collecting this data from. Public forums can help with that, tribal events, certainly. But when you identify who can help you with this person has to be a community organizer, someone with that spirit of service that can connect with people and have them open up and ask the types of questions that you're going to see here. So who defines the problem and who does not define it as a problem, right? So it could be that some people feel like we need teacher housing, and some will say that's not an issue. So it just, asking them to elaborate on these questions, on these concerns, right, that you've been hearing in the community. What is the cause of the issue? Current program support help to eradicate the issues. There's something that we as a department should be doing. What's the consequence of continuing or discontinuing a certain program, or starting a housing program for, let's say, education, for example, or rental education? That's one that it blew my mind that we don't have as many rental education options for folks, even in curriculum. There really isn't much by way of rental education available to our tribal youth as they age out of the home that they've been living in, as they don't necessarily want to stay with a family anymore. And the argument is, do they have the tools? What are the forces for or against closing the gap between the need and the resource, right? So thinking about that will help design your questions. And again, focus groups, public forums, name it something fun, something exciting, something positive. Housing futures meeting as opposed to a housing needs assessment can help, because you don't want that negative vibe, right? You don't want it to be negative with little solution. You don't want this to be a gripe session. It really should try to stay positive with activities and opportunities for them to communicate with folks. That's within the project. Let's see here. So again, going back to the story, the task force itself. The reason why the story matters is because I think sometimes too, we want to tell the story for them. This gives anything that you do quantitatively in terms of numbers, it'll enhance your qualitative questions. What do I mean by that? So of course, anyone can say, what are current market housing prices and rents, right? Those numbers might be available to you, or you can collect that. But are those rates higher than those in similar towns, similar tribal communities, or nearby tribal communities? That's more of a qualitative. I'm going to have to find that information out. I'm going to have to talk to the folks in another housing authority, ask them questions, etc. Are vacancy rates for rental or owner-occupied housing demands unusually high? If they are unusually high, are there enough new affordable housing units being built to meet the near-term demands, right? What does that look like? And who would make those decisions? And, have I had conversations with those decision makers? What workforce training collaborations have been successful? Could be in the eye of the beholder, right? So learning more about the percentage of employers seeking qualified staff, right? So just knowing that they're having a hard time with qualified staff might prompt new questions regarding training collaborations. And then, of course, community economic development. Sometimes housing is left out of the discussion. And I think that, it's interesting because in non-Native communities, typically you hear the frustration at superintendent meetings and other education meetings when there's redistricting or there's overcrowding, because folks will say, well, did the Board of Commissioners and the county think about growth and how that was going to impact the school system? And so there's a lot of conversation that happens there in regards to I won't say finger pointing or blame game, but some of that is happening. And so you want this to be a conversation where community development, and housing are having active discussions as to what this would mean for planned community efforts, right? Additional community profile questions could look like how many household homeless people are evident in care or rumored to be with friends and family. This is one that comes directly from a Native housing needs assessment, written very different than in a non-Native community. What is the condition of the current rental housing stock, and so on. So these are just additional community profile questions that you can look over and determine what might be right for you. Again, going back to the sources of the data, that's a list there for you. And this is the CAS community survey, Census Americans Community Survey data that you can collect as well. And that'll give you housing tenure, housing types. These are the types of things you all would want to collect as well. So that list is available to you. As I said before, for our urban Indian areas, then Zillow MLS, which is the multi-list service, where they provide housing prices and housing data. Income definitions. So I know sometimes that can also throw us off as far as the definitions that we have that are HUD defined versus, when we're working, maybe we're choosing to work with new market tax credits or with private groups that will support housing. And there's a lot of down payment assistance programs and things like that, where you're going to be working with private funders, in which case the definition of housing, your definition of housing could look different than that of HUD. This is a housing stability report. It was drafted in December of 2023, and basically it talks about the HAF funds, the housing assistance funds that were available via Treasury. And I wanted to bring up couple different things. I wanted to highlight, certainly you can see a double in the Native American population and the growth therein, right? And then if you look at table 3, it shows you that 65.2% of those living in overcrowded area housing were also living with essential workers. So the idea that there isn't workforce housing is prevalent all across the country. Talking about maintaining our homes, the biggest issue that we find as far as the cost burden is in regards to heating the home, and it's literally 12 points higher than the national average. So that's huge. Of course, the kitchen, plumbing, electrical, other issues. Nothing that we don't already know in tribal housing, but it's just telling to me that when we think about the needs assessment itself, we want to dig deeper than that. We want to know what story these numbers are telling us. So allocating resources, this is the hard part. Where do we fund? How do we fund the housing needs assessment? Certainly, I think you have to find like-minded groups that are interested in the local housing situation. And so, for example, I feel like either they see the webinar and, if you build it, they will come kind of thing. But I just got off a webinar this morning from Enterprise Community Partners, and they're talking about Section 4, which is the program that they have that specializes in capacity building, right? So those are the kind of keywords you want to look for. What is capacity building? Let's find out. I'm going to take it directly from today's webinar that they had earlier, where they talk about working with CDCs, tribal TDHEs, THAs, and Native CDFIs to build the organization's capacity. So what does that look like? Pre-development capital, housing needs assessment. It's right there in the list. Upgrades on rental software platforms. So if you're in need of an upgrade on that, that's available to you as well. Hiring new staff, right? Or maybe even homeownership staff, or maybe it's support for the housing assessment, because you are going to need it's not a one-man job, right? Outside of the committee, who's going to help you with this really does depend on the data you're trying to collect, and then training and professional development for those staff. So from a capacity standpoint, the Enterprise Section 4 grant is a great option for you. They actually are in the process of creating a timeline for a funding announcement. So I would say if you can get to the website, and I can put it in the chat area there, and join their newsletter, then you'll have access to when that becomes available to you. So that is how you allocate funding options. as I said before, looking for partners is important. Salish and Kootenai Tribe, Housing Authority, they are a part of the Flathead Housing Coalition. And what they did was that they partnered with the Montana Health Foundation. Sorry, I'm getting spent about an hour talking, but the Montana Healthcare Foundation, and then of course with HUD to support additional getting the information regarding what their needs were in their community. And if you want more on the project details themselves, you can go to Big Water Consulting, and that website is there, which I will also put in the chat. So, for example, White Mountain Apache Housing Needs Assessment in White River, Arizona, which, let's see, are you on here today? No. But I will highlight their program in which they developed a forward-looking plan and program management to identify and measure the needs of the community. And they did so working with a household survey that collected data from 654 homes on the reservation, and overall response rate of 97.2, which is really high for response rate. So that's great that they were able to do that. And so these two are highlighted on the website there. This is kind of where they're located, and this is what they did. They did a household survey, focus groups, and interviews. They analyzed newly collected data, right? So certainly there are other resources that you can, community partners in other areas where you can get data and use that to your advantage. And then the needs assessment itself. The neat thing about this particular this needs assessment is that it wasn't just housing. So just kind of expanding on the conversation, it had demographics, it had economic development, it had components of health, housing, permanent supportive housing, which is like a wraparound support services sort of housing opportunity for your community, behavioral health and housing and the intersection there, and then income. So it looked at several different focus areas outside of housing, which I found to be interesting. And why is that important? Because, even for your, sorry, it wasn't moving forward. Even for your housing needs assessment, you want to create a mission statement or be mission minded, I should say, because what you don't want is that collecting data for the sake of collecting data isn't the goal. You really want to make sure it fits your need. And so sometimes when you're working with partners, it's a great partnership. And sometimes it may take you down a road that you didn't really want to go on, right? So I think there has to be a balance, and that's why I bring up mission statement. Just make sure that it aligns. In this particular case, this is what they wanted to do from the outset, and so it was good that they were able to make it there. But in your case, you may just want a housing needs assessment and not include those other partners. It's going to be whatever's best for you. I don't want anybody going out there and saying, Marie said, I want you to that you should partner with me. So for example, how does this work when you're applying it? How much land is available for future development? What types of housing? I'm going to define those gaps by analyzing the demographic characteristics. I'm going to talk economic factors in terms of developing that land, the land use, working with other tribal departments, I'm sure, in getting that information. The cost associated with that, of course, I'm going to have to work with finance and other tribal departments to get that information if it's not in-house. And then, of course, what is my current funding sources look like? What do those policies and procedures look like as far as allocating additional resources, leveraging those resources, right? So sometimes it sounds great when you've got IHBG funds dedicated and ICDBG, if you're lucky enough to have been awarded, and then also to, low-income housing tax credits, and you've got all these different funding sources available to you. And it's great that you're leveraging those resources, but you also want to make sure that you're, compliant. And what does that look like? And making sure that all of those things are available to that particular land and land type, right? So there's a lot of instruments involved in that. And so you want to have a conversation with the committee in regards to what kind of information you'll need to facilitate that discussion. Another example is employment, right? So let's say you have commute. This is prevalent on almost all Native community Indian country in terms of like the sheer distance that we have to go for work and collaboration with community partners. So this might be a relevant factor that you want to make sure you have that information in there regarding employment and like referral partners, right? Let's say you want to create a workforce development training program, and you want to talk about those boundaries. How far will the referral partner have to be in order for this to make sense, right? Or should I have and hire someone on staff? What does that look like? So the availability of transit can also enlarge your market area, in which case that's why you would want to collect that on transportation. So again, looking at the types of partners that I would connect with. I know when Cheyenne River Housing Authority was doing their needs assessments, of course, they connected with Forebands, their native CDFI. In urban areas, you might want to connect with the Indian Health Institute. You would look back for context. This is the housing needs, basically a housing needs report for the discussing NAHASDA itself and IHBG and ICDBG funds and how far that has gotten Native communities. I think it was published in 2017. So that gives you great context as well. Conducting the needs assessment itself, of course, you would go to community events, powwows, pageants, anywhere you can, basketball tournaments, LNI. You'll go wherever you can where the community is meeting to get the information by mail. And, I know that when you have the committee, you're going to have a mix of generations as well. And you got to focus on the fact that even though online or social media would be cost effective, you got to look at it. Not necessarily. A graphic designer, a good one, can cost you a pretty penny too. But by mail, you got to look at it from who's going to their banking services in an actual bank, right? There are going to be people who still do that and still want that as a service and don't want to go online or care to go online to answer questions. And then there's going to be folks that are very comfortable with that. So it's basically a mix, and you're going to have, I think both options would be best. Certainly it's more costly to send mail out. And especially you want to make sure the response rates are positive. So you don't want to waste and have folks not turn it in. So there's a balance there. Maybe not by mail, but by, tribal distribution, right? The community that we served in South Florida, they had their own tribal box and they had a mail service. So we would oftentimes just put it in the tribal box and leave the mail services alone and not go that route. At central locations in the community, of course, you want to go where people are, Boys and Girls Club, or, might be the community center, the elder center, one-on-one meetings with potential homeowners. For example, if you're already having those meetings, maybe you're doing some education and training, that's a great place to say, hey, I need just 10 minutes of your time. And then, of course, group meetings that folks are having throughout the day. You can always ask that they disseminate the needs assessment for you. As I said before, social media and online is a good option. Person to person, drop off and pick up are options as well. Sometimes I don't necessarily. When you have someone in front of you and you're filling it out, there's a little bit of a incentive for just getting it done. Sometimes you can work with community partners, give them tchotchkes, little things that they get for free if they fill it out, which is always helpful. Another reason to have private partners, because sometimes you can't use funds to pay for things like that. So when it's Wells Fargo or something like that, or a local community partner, they will pick up the tab for things that can help, swag that can help promote the needs assessment. Certainly telephone interviews are great, but you also want to be and have some sort of screening process for the folks that are doing it so that they understand that their voice can sometimes get picked up by the person they're interviewing. And so there's a way to kind of remove yourself from that. So something to be mindful of. And I think Kim can talk a little bit about that as well when we get there, which will be very soon, it looks like. Can't believe it's already been 40 minutes. So the surveys themselves, I got this directly from the handbook on homeownership for leadership. So if you have new leadership and they're new to housing and the focus there, this leadership handbook is great. But it talks about survey instruments and how it works. I know that you need to create a task list. You need to make sure that you're evaluating the questions themselves. See if you can afford, if when you do the budget, you can get a research design assistant. This could be from a tribal college, or it could be from, as I said, a consultant that can assist you with drafting the questions. So it removes bias, it removes certain sorts of data sets, right? Making sure you're asking the right questions and you're classifying them correctly is important. Of course, you're going to have revisions, right? Sometimes you're asking the question and it's coming out wrong, or people don't understand it, right? So you might have to revise it. But once you start administering the survey, you want to monitor results. This is how you're going to get your participation rates and whether or not it's working. You want it to be successful. Monitoring and evaluating outcomes. This is the part where I have been a part of seeing estimate for the number of units grow, right? The folks information see the gap and they choose to create new housing opportunities through development. I've also seen folks look at housing types and say, well, maybe there's new or alternative manufacturing options for us to consider. So the gap that you see once you collect your data, these are some of the things you would look at, projected job growth, seniors, what is the growth of the senior population and how would we address this concern, right? So you're now taking the numbers and turning them into questions that you yourself and your department would want to have asked, right? So this can turn into planning future actions, implementing changes, or even repeating the assessment. And you might say, well, I just did it. Why do I got to do it again? Your report itself will be made up of the community profile, the workforce profile, housing inventory, your gap or final findings, that analysis, and then, of course, land and capacity analysis if you ask those questions as well. Let's see here. I'm going to switch ahead and show you a project, right, that started with the committee creation itself, or maybe the committee was existing in the case of the coalition. They had a housing needs assessment. They drafted a housing action plan, or the committee came up with certain policies or procedures they wanted to implement. And they wanted to make sure that they could also, put this out for the community, let them see it, have them provide input. Then they actually finalize their housing action plan and turn that into something that was adopted by their coalition to be able to promote several different programming to support housing, both for veteran housing and also down payment assistance. So what does planning look like? We're going to have a conversation here with, I'm going to skip ahead here because I want to make sure I get to her. It can look like a lot of different things, right? So in this particular picture, we're looking at Cheyenne River Housing Authority. They were able to, with the help of a needs assessment, determine how much multifamily housing they were going to maybe provide in addition to single family housing. They created a comprehensive master plan that included housing for rental assistance for home buyers, not first time, but home buyers. And then there was also a section specifically for Native veterans, right? So this particular planned community needed assistance from IHS. They were able, because it was such a comprehensive plan, they were able to get IHS to pay for all of the infrastructure, which was a huge saving cost to the buyers. So when you look at it from affordability standpoint, it was a great project to come to fruition. In addition to that, they were able to seek, and I think it's called Invest Native, which is a Wells Fargo grant, and I will put that link in the chat area. And what they were able to do with that was build the sidewalks and lights, I believe, things that wouldn't necessarily be covered with your NAHASDA dollars. So it goes to show you that the innovation and the creativity that came with this particular development was born out of the needs assessment and some of the comments and the stories that were provided in addition to the numbers. So what you see there is the residential apartment concept that will include commercial space. So bringing in the economic arm and saying, how can we, I think it was their native CDFI that has an incubator program, right? That they support native small businesses. And once those incubation elements are finished, how do you get this person some retail space? What does that look like? And so they thought, well, what if we were able to do some sort of mixed use? So that's a neat success story there as to how a needs assessment resulted in the creation of additional housing. Another thing is in publishing the report, you want to make sure you have both the larger report and then smaller one-page brochures that talk about the findings and the action plans. So now at this time, I'd like to bring on a guest speaker, and I have the privilege of working with Kim with the Kim Longsoldier is her name, and she is with the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition. She is the Homeownership Program Manager, and her role within the program is basically to support both a very large grant with a lot of stakeholders, the Wells Fargo Wealth Opportunities Restored Through Homeownership, also known as WORTH grant. It was awarded in partnership with, get this, CB, FAHI, Communities Unlimited, HOPE, RCAC, and OISA, collectively known as the Partners for Rural Transformation. So that's a lot of stakeholders. And so I really appreciate Kim being on the call. If you want to unmute your mic, I'll let you introduce yourself to the folks as well. Let's see. Kim. Are you still there, Kim? I don't see you as a guest, but I don't see your mic.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi.
Hi. Okay, I was listening. Well, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. My name is Kim Longsoldier, and Marie introduced, did a little bit of my, I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous, but she, gave a little bit of my bio for my current, or for my position within the South Dakota Native Home Ownership Coalition. But I am also one of the lead coordinators for our Native Veterans Housing Needs Assessment that is currently going on right now. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I served a little over 11 years in the Army, and I'm also a combat veteran. In 2012, I was discharged. Well, I was honorably discharged, and I moved home back to South Dakota, Kyle, South Dakota, which is located on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And when I moved home, I realized there was no resources available for like housing or veterans just in general. Like we had no resources available for us. So I just felt like this needs assessment was huge. I think that doing this would bring a lot of resources and get a lot of attention from everywhere. But so one thing that I had found with other veterans is that they live off the reservation. They move to cities. They don't come home because we are lacking resources. We're like, especially housing. Housing is huge. I mean, like, for my story, I was, 29 years old when I got out. I was a single mom of 2 boys, and I found myself like living with my parents. And I joined the military when I was 17. And so I lived on my own since I was 17. And I just felt like, there should be more opportunities, more housing, more resources. I didn't know about home ownership at all. So I was just surprised, which is why this project is near and dear to my heart. I'm the 3rd generation veteran. And my son, he's currently active duty right now, and he's the fourth. So that's why I hold this like near and dear to my heart, because I want my son to be able to come home to have at least resources or know about home ownership programs, or to be able to, be directed, and, have some good direction, point him to where he needs to go and what he needs to do and stuff like that. Just not only for him, but there's a lot of veterans across the whole state of South Dakota, but not even there, just across the country in general. But okay, so I just want to tell you about our Veterans Housing Needs Assistant assessment that's currently going on. Okay, it originally started June 6th during our site visit, and it was just a bunch of tribal representatives, VSOs, like government reps that attended this meeting, and they agreed that this would be something that was needed. So we went through the first stages. The phase one was the project design and the planning, which we did last summer of 2023. This is whenever we went over the surveys, and it was more tailored to like the tribal concerns, and we went through so many different veterans organizations just to cut the survey down to the specific needs of the veterans. It went from like 20 pages to down to 10. And I was the first one to do it. And I said, personal experience, if I was a veteran, I wouldn't want to do this. I mean, this is just too long for me. Like, I just, I'll sit down, I'll give you 5 minutes of my time because I'm, stuff to do. So we cut it down, which I thought was really awesome because I got a lot of feedback. And I mean, so far it's been going really well. But and then we developed like PR strategies. We met with TVSOs and other tribal representatives from all 9 reservations across South Dakota, because this needs assessment covers all nine reservations. So we set the foundation, and then we started going with each reservation and doing and like trying to find events, or just planning ahead, so where we can begin this. Our funding was we're still reaching out for funding, but for the most part we had like Lakota Federal Credit Union donated us $1,000 in gift certificates, because of course a survey can get done with some sort of incentive. So we had that, and we set our goals, and then we tried to have other incentives. If we read out of our gift certificates, we'd have like a mug with candy and just small things that would catch their attention. And then the second phase was the data collection, and which is what we're currently working on right now, and it's actually starting with reservations. So we started with 4, and it began in October, and this goes until April. But we actually been pushing it, because the more veterans we can get to collect the surveys or to do the surveys, the more numbers we have, and just gives us a bigger picture of what is really needed. And this, like I said, this goes on till April. We do a lot of traveling. We do a lot of outreach. I've done presentations for VSOs, TVSOs. We've gone to Lakota Nation Invitational. We've gone to Black Hills Powwow. We've gone to small, especially during Veterans Day weekend, we've gone to a lot of powwows during that time. And I mean, so far, like, our numbers aren't exactly high because we're doing paper surveys, and we don't count those numbers until they're uploaded into the computer, but there's an actual link that we use. So like right now I'm going around collecting paper surveys, and then I have volunteers to upload that information for me. And I think that's really amazing. And the coalition has we have a veterans committee, and the veterans committee is like VSOs, TVSOs, VA reps that attend this, and we just come up with like ways to promote it, social media, flyers, TDHEs. A lot of them have websites, posted on their websites, radio stations, a quick, mention on like the local college, what do you call it, their channel. I have flyers all over the place. I've reached out to all of our coalition member organizations to promote it, and we kind of made like a competition out of it so far, and that's where our numbers have been coming from. So from Oglala Sioux Tribe, we're leading the way, and that's because a lot of them is local to me. So we just feel that we need a new one because in 2019 this was done, but it was only done on 3 of the reservation, and the numbers were so low. But there was a time constraint. They only had like a 1 month to do it. But those numbers tell us, like, I mean, they were so low. It's like I always tell everybody, like, I said, how can we bring resources to our reservations with, one reservation having 9 done. We know there's more than 9 veterans on that reservation. It's just getting it out there, getting the support from, tribal council. I've spoken for the Great Plains Tribal Chairmen's Association. I got on their agenda twice, even if it's just support, some type of, financial donation they can give us to help support it. I mean, that's what I've been pushing for. Anything we can do as far as outreach, we're there real quick. We'll, jump in our cars and drive there just to promote it, get surveys done. And like so far we're doing good. We have 3 more months to complete it. And then from that point, that's when the reporting will get consolidated. That's with Big Water Consulting. And they'll just, give us the data and the recommendations. And through our outreach efforts, we promote home ownership. We promote NADL. We promote, all of our native CDFIs. There's a lot of resources, which is really surprising, that are available to veterans that not a lot of veterans know about. I mean, and some of the native CDFIs have like specific, how would I say, it's like match savings program for like Lakota Federal Credit Union has one for down payment assistance. So if a veteran deposits 1,000, they'll match them 3,500. So I mean, it's really, through this survey, it's really just an eye-opening experience. It really is. And I just feel like when I go out there and I talk to the veterans, I get a lot of positive feedback. And there's a lot of challenges with it though, because you have those older veterans who, are stuck in their ways and just feel like, what are you going to do for me? What's going to be done? People make promises, and I always tell them, I said that, you never know. It's a 50-50 chance. I said, you just, help with the survey. It's completely anonymous. I said, we're not asking for, any personal information. We're just asking you to be completely honest with us, and that's just, I mean, it's just, there's just so much to it. It's kind of sad though. It's really, really sad. And I just felt like there's a lot of veterans that need help, and I've met with a lot of veterans organizations that, have done their own survey to present to council, and nothing was done. But this is statewide. It's the coalition doing it. And I think with the coalition, since we're getting out there a lot more, I think that this would make a huge difference. We have some of our coalition board members that go to DC, and that's where they use these numbers, even the numbers in 2019, to change policies and whatnot, especially on Indian reservations. But I just think that housing needs assessments just in general for natives is really important. It does bring attention to our reservations and the housing needs, especially that it's really sad, just how we have to live. So I think these housing assessments will really benefit each tribe.
Thank you, Kim. That is, I think that's a great synopsis of everything that you've been working on in your community, and also what the coalition has been working on to bring awareness to the needs within each reservation as unique sovereign entities, but then also to as a state and that coalition effort to bring other funders and other partners to the process to say we need everybody at the table so that we can address this concern. So I do appreciate greatly having worked with you. These are mission-minded individuals that come and serve our country, and then when they come home, to not be able to actually go home, for them to use the regular VA loan, which is a higher interest rate than the NADL, which is where they could currently have an interest rate of 2.5. It's just disheartening to know that it's about the information and the lack of information. That's one of the things that the housing needs assessment was so great in highlighting in 2019, and it's great to see that you're doing it again here now in 2024. So I guess just one last question, and then I'll open it up for anybody who has a question for Kim in regards to that element. If somebody's had a needs assessment done in the last 4 or 5 years and they don't necessarily think they need a new one, why did you all feel the need to do it again?
I just felt with the coalition growing, I think that with all the staff that we're bringing on, and then we have member organizations on the reservations or around the reservations, that it would bring more attention to veterans, and we can use them to do outreach, use them to help veterans.
Thank you. No, that is true. The coalition has grown and its staff capacity has grown to the point where I think you have workforce development programs where those individuals who are getting paid to increase in inspection and appraisal positions could also maybe earn a few dollars and do some of this work as well, as far as getting outreach out. So it's really about thinking about ways to maximize your capacity with what you have and the resources that you have. Again, I want to ask, are there any other questions for Kim in the chat? If not, I'm just going to wrap it up real quick with some more success stories. I think it's really hard sometimes when you're seeing what all you'll need for a needs assessment to then go, really focus in on some of the success that we've had as a result of the needs assessment. So if you have any questions for Kim, go ahead and put it in the chat area and I'll try to get those questions answered for you. Additionally, I'll put her contact info in the chat area since she's graciously said that she'll answer your questions along the way. So as you start to develop your needs assessment committee and whatever challenges you might be facing, you can kind of count on Kim to kind of give you some guidance in what she's seen in her position and role as housing program manager. So with that, I want to say thank you again, Kim, for contributing to today's discussion. And I'm going to go ahead and just show you some other successes. So as Kim mentioned, for example, the Native American Direct Loan, which is administered by the VA, had just 89 loans in the continental US from 2012 to 2021. That's insane. As Kim mentioned, she's got a fourth generation. Her son is in the Army now. And so the idea that there are so many Native American veterans that could have participated in this program since 2012, that number is really needed to be addressed. So the good thing about the housing needs assessment and this particular discussion that you can find on YouTube highlights what was as a result of the needs assessment, what they found. And so some of those findings include poor credit or lack of understanding about credit, navigating the bureaucracy and the paperwork challenges. Even the successful loan applicants cited issues that they had with working with NADL staff to get it done. Most of the veterans had some sort of consistent VA income, and yet they weren't being able to be approved, and there was no follow-up. So they get a denial letter and then not know what to do next. Of course, the education component was lacking. Many of them didn't even know about the NADL versus a VA loan. So there was that. So what Cheyenne River decided to do specifically was certainly they needed to address the difficulty of saving for down payment and closing costs, poor credit and low credit scores, the inability to manage household finances. These are just things that people cited as issues and impediments to homeownership. So they worked with their native CDFI. They used OESTA's Building Native Communities, and we created an online platform where they could come as Native veterans to support housing. So myself, as the virtual trainer, I provided the training, and we had it in two ways. One, the staff facilitated on site the training, so people would hear me speak, but they'd have books in front of them, and it was very much the old school way, except for the virtual trainer. And then we also had folks, if it went down the line of generations, and you had folks that would just jump on the Zoom and take it that way, we had veterans that did that as well. So that really opened up the ability for us to talk about the programming that, and also bring the NADL staff on to the webinar so they could have more of a conversation with our veterans. As Kim said, they want to talk to the people they feel comfortable with, and they just didn't feel comfortable in that in the other environments. This particular veteran said, "Ten Hunt, we salute you. Your 12-week program provided us with guidance and tools. It gave us hope and preparation, and it sustains us to the point of setting a first-class goal. And that goal is homeownership, which they rightly deserve." So here's some more information about the trainings, number of people who attended, our response and our response rates. Here's questions that we asked about the online training. So the collection of data never stops. I wish that was the case, but once we realized that this training was successful, we wanted to make sure that through the committee and through the work that they were doing to create policy change, that we include all the tribes in South Dakota and not just the 3 that we started out with. So, and we were able to share those best practices with those tribes that weren't able to participate that first round. So that's that link. If you know anyone in South Dakota who a Native veteran, is it North Dakota and South Dakota or just North Dakota? I'll find out. But either way, you can definitely just take a hold of that link there. I'll put it in the chat area, and you can get that out to them as well. That will help him out greatly. I do have some other references and resources available to you I wanted to highlight. We talked about funding. And so, as I said before, Enterprise and their Section 4 funding is available. It's not open right now, so you have time to kind of gather the information. But let me give you a little bit of info about that particular grant. So it's available in North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Arizona, and New Mexico. Its eligible organizations must be Native-led or Native serving of tribes and TDHEs 501c3s. So that's the eligibility. So up to $100,000 for capacity building projects, those projects I mentioned before, which are housing affordability access, sustainable climate resiliency, financial health, small business growth. This is all via Invest Native, which is a part of the Wells Fargo $20 million 5-year investment in Indian country. So I will find that link and put it in the chat area. They're going to have some webinars on grant writing, on grant management, on Invest Native, the notice of funding opportunity itself. They'll talk about that. And so certainly you want to keep an eye out for Invest Native if you're in North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Arizona, or New Mexico. Going back one, that Section 4 capacity building, that one's a little different. It's open to those entities I mentioned before, and that NOFA's not out yet. The average award is usually about $45,000. And I think what would be great to this webinar is a follow-up on funding a housing needs assessment and what that looks like for your community. What will $45,000 get you exactly? What kind of money does it take and resource capacity building does it take to see a community needs assessment go from planning to facilitating the kind of work that we're doing here? So with that, we've got these references and resources here as well that I've listed for you. And I do want to ask if you have any questions, so feel free to put it in the chat area for me. If not, I'm going to go to work and start putting those links in the chat area for Invest Native and for the enterprise grant as well.
All right, so I'll go ahead and start closing out the webinar. Thank you so much, Marie. That was incredible. And thank you also to you, Kim. What incredible work that both of you are doing. That was so amazing for you to come on and join this webinar as a guest speaker. I'm going to go ahead and launch the webinar feedback survey for everybody. It's going to appear on your screen. Just a heads up, it's going to kind of jump up in front of you. But if you could take a moment to complete that, please, it helps us do more of what's working, helps us to know about things that maybe could be improved upon. And it is an anonymous survey, so we invite you to be as candid as you would like. It just takes a moment or two to fill out. And we hope you can join us for our next webinar. That is actually going to be tomorrow. That's forecasting for federal grants given by Diane Leonard. 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, or 10 a.m. if you are in Alaska. And registration, as always, is free. So she's going to be talking about some federal grants to be on the lookout for this year. And feel free to access this and any other recorded webinars online on our website, nativelearningcenter.com. There is a Catheta Webinars tab where there's a recorded webinar section. So you can click on any one of the webinars that we've done over the past 2 years. Feel free to view them, share them with your friends, share them with your colleagues. And please also check out our upcoming events posted to our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we have a podcast titled Hopathanga Native American Podcast, where we discuss more focused topics within tribal housing and self-determination. You can find that on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple, and you can view the video recordings with our guests on YouTube as well. All right, folks. Once again, I want to thank all our participants for joining us today. And thank you again, Marie and Kim. That was absolutely incredible. We hope that everybody has a wonderful day, and we hope to connect with you really soon. Yeah, to answer the question from the chat, yes, this one is absolutely recorded, and we will have that posted within 48 hours of now. Great question.